Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Sponsored by the Meadowlands Hotel in Tralee.
So I was not prepared. I had made up my mind I was going to withdraw from the campaign. And I had talked it over with Martin and decided that's it. I'll withdraw because I couldn't betray John Hume ever.
Mary, the campaign for the presidency is notoriously cruel sometimes.
It is cruel. I didn't expect it to be easy. I mean, I was an observer and had been a journalist long enough to know just how miserable things can be. And Mary Robinson didn't have it easy, believe you me, when she stood for election. And so I knew it could be tough, and awful stuff could happen. And it did.
Unlike in general elections, there seems to be a different vibe, a different toughness.
Well, you see, you're focusing on persons, on personality and their track record. And you're doing it in a very, very tight time frame as well. Some of the people who've come forward might not be very well known. I wouldn't have been necessarily that well known. I mean, anybody who followed current affairs in the few years earlier might have vaguely remembered my face. People had to get to know you as a person over a very short, not a campaign of probably about 6 weeks to be true. My view always was that I would never diss other candidates. Why? If I was going for a job interview, but generally speaking, you wouldn't even know who the other candidates are. What you're about is revealing who you are yourself and letting the people then judge. So that was always my view of it. Not others took a different view and decided to go after me. I think they would admit now that was not a good idea. No. They were mistaken, and it was a bad idea. My view also was, at the end of the day, you're interviewing for one of the most important jobs in the country. You're going to be the prime ambassador of the country. You're going to be hopefully a great representative. People have to be sure that you are capable of taking whatever is thrown at you. So I consoled myself with that until the allegation of being a Sinn Féin fellow traveller. And at that point, the only way I could inform people that I most certainly was not, because that information had come in the context of the Hume Adams talks. And I would have to reveal those talks. They were private, they were secret, they were absolutely crucial to the eventual IRA going on, ceasefire, and Sinn Féin coming into the talks, and the Good Friday Agreement. Without them, there would be no Good Friday Agreement. So I was not prepared. I was not prepared to reveal that. So I had made up my mind I was going to withdraw from the campaign. And I had talked it over with Martin and decided that's it. I'll withdraw because I couldn't betray John Hume ever. The next morning I woke up ready to talk to the campaign manager and break the bad news to him, and turned on the radio, and there was the head of the Redemptorist Order telling the story. He had decided they couldn't stand by and let the lie continue, because they knew the context I worked in. And one of the reasons they asked me was because I was not politically aligned to the IRA or to Sinn Féin or any of their doings. So that stopped me in my tracks that morning. And another thing happened. My great mentor up until the age of 18 was a passionist priest called Father Justin Coyne, a Westmeath man. At that time, we didn't know about clerical child sex abuse, and we didn't know all that stuff. Thank God he died before all of that came into the public domain. He was a saint. He was what you want in a priest. Oh, he was good, he was kind, he was gentle. I blame him for my long-term interest in theology and canon law and things godly. But he had died the week that I first went out with Martin McAleese. And again, I put my relationship with Martin down to his care. And I'd often talk to him in my head, because whatever else I believe in, that link between the living and the dead, the communion of saints, I have a great passion for and great belief in. But anyway, that morning, the post came and there was a parcel. And what was in it? Only a letter and a parcel from his sister, who was a nun in England, whom I didn't even know he had a sister, a nun. This is 30 years after he died. And she sent me the cross that hung from his rosary beads, and I just couldn't believe it. And I thought that was Justin saying to me, hang in there, you'll be okay. And I took great comfort from that.
Did you call your son Justin after him?
And that's what, of course, on the day that Father Justin was buried, I made a promise to myself that if I ever had a son, he would be called Justin, and I would entrust him to Justin's care. And he surely has minded him.
Minded him very well. Being elected president is a huge honour, a huge responsibility, but it's also a huge upheaval for family.
That was probably the toughest part of it. I relished the job. I loved the fact that I now had this wind at my back, not just for me as a person, but for the project, which was building bridges, that the people got that we were in a moment where we could build bridges that had been fractured or that didn't exist at all. So
that was the theme of your presidency.
Yes, that was the theme. Now, it's a simple concept, but very important in the context of the times. This was months before the Good Friday Agreement. And so I just felt that the people of Ireland, when they had voted for building bridges, had captured the moment. They knew that we were in a very special moment, and they were sending a message that they were right behind the peace process, which was terrific. But now I had to move my 3 children, all teenagers. The eldest Emma was 15, the twins were 13, and they were happy as sand, boys and girls, in the school that they were at in Kilkeel. It was a co-ed school. So my kids were now at that school, which had morphed from a convent girls' school into a mixed school. Fabulous school, just terrific. Happy out. Magnificent location looking out over Carlingford Lough. Oh, it was delightful. They've gone back to school in September, well, with all their mates. Now they're yanked out of that school summarily. And not only that, but they've also had a tough time because during the campaign, whenever that allegation was made that I was a fellow traveller with Sinn Féin, there were huge security implications for me and for them. And so they had to live with protection and being moved out of the house and all of that. And they were terrified. So now we're taking them down to Dublin. Now, they knew Dublin well. They were well used to being in Dublin, but now they're in the middle of a park. There's no bus service, and they are stuck in schools, and they're in separate schools because it wasn't the easiest thing to find a co-ed school at that time that would be handy to the Aris. I took my eye off that ball big time. The girls were happy enough in Loretto on the Green. They liked that school, and they had a wonderful headmistress who became a great friend of mine subsequently, who became a canon lawyer and is still a great friend of mine, Liz Cotter. Justin, unfortunately, went to Belvedere, where he was miserable, a bit on the macho bullying side. So he hated it, and we eventually had to pull him from that. And then his twin, although the school that she was at was lovely, she was miserable. She missed her friends back in Rostrevor. So we had the twins, actually. Emma was okay, except that she was petrified that she'd walked straight into junior cert year. That was a bit of a shock. Right. Justin's Tamagotchi died on the way down the road. That nearly killed the whole lot of them. Sarah was miserable, and so miserable that she decided, without a by your leave, that she was going back to live in Rostrevor with her grandparents. And we had to cope with that. Anyway, we dealt with it in bits. First of all, I said to Emma, you don't have to do the junior cert. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And that kind of calmed her down. But it also made her she went thick and she did the darn thing then and did grand in it, which was fine. Sarah, she was in major martyrdom mode now. And the other two were both rowers. Were rowing with, thank God for Neptune Club. And so the morning after she told us she was moving back to Rostrevor at 13, I said to Martin, we're the big people around here. Why are we even listening to this? So I went down to her room and I said, get up, put on a pair of trainers. You are going down into the river. You're going to row, whether you like it or whether you don't. Happily, there was a spot on a boat. There were 4 handsome lads. She got a slot as the coxswain, and she never looked back.
Wow, very
she
good.
never mentioned going to Rostrevor. She came home that evening. She was hooked on rowing. Great rower. She rowed for Oxford. She was just super. But then the other fellow, we had to pull him from the school. And then the big question was, would it be any better in another school? Do you know, would he be happier? Because he said to me, Mum, I'm co-ed since the womb. And so we looked around for a co-ed school. Leo Varadkar's daddy was our doctor, Ashok, fantastic man. And he suggested the school that Leo went to, King's Hospital School. Justin turned up on day one. And from day one, he loved the bones and stones of that place.
Isn't that great?
I couldn't believe the transformation in him.
Yeah.
The atmosphere was different. The ethos was different. Everything about it was just so different.
It suited him.
Yeah, it did.
And did they like living in the Oris?
They did, yeah, up to a point.
I mean, let's face it, it's a very nice house.
But by the time Martin and I left, our kids were all gone.
That's true, yeah.
There was none of them left in the house by the time we left. They were all gone and happy in many ways. They had it was a privileged place to grow up in, 99 rooms. And lots to explore, and the privilege of being in a kind of a cockpit where you saw a political scenario, global scenario, worked out in that place. So yes, but on the other hand, we had to make very sure that they were not on anybody's celebrity A-list, and that they didn't do any celeb stuff, and that they didn't that they weren't. That they weren't exposed by virtue of my role. So we kept them. You wanted really normality. We wanted them to have as quiet
movie nights and ordering takeaways,
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we did all that, and that was a bit of a hassle until they persuaded the Chinese that it definitely was being delivered to Ars Nocturne and it was genuine. So we had all that to do, but they had a good life there, and they all, Emma went first to UCD. And then later to Trinity. Justin went to UCD. Emma loved both universities, did engineering in one and dentistry in the other. And Sarah, she went to Oxford and then came back and after doing her master's there as well, and she went to Maynooth for a year. Absolutely loved Maynooth. Did immunology and global health, and then did her doctorate in surgeons. So they've all been out and about and around and did different things, and nobody would have even known who they were. I think, thank God, they just did their own thing.
You, Mary, and Martin, during the presidency, was it a time of great responsibility and great satisfaction, but you kind of had to put your own life on hold?
You do, because your life is now the job.
Yeah.
At the same time, you are parents and you have family. So you have to take that responsibility seriously and guide the children through those early times when they were a bit at sea, but then steadied up, and put their hearts and souls into what they were doing. But then you also had a staff in the Aris as well. And they had to be looked after because you wanted them to feel that you had their best interests in mind, whether it was in terms of creating an atmosphere that was a happy atmosphere, creating an atmosphere that was supportive and affirmative, and that in terms of presentation of uniforms and giving them the opportunity to do advanced studies or extras, go back and do studying, all of that, upskilling. We wanted it to be in a live place where they really felt that we were with them. We were a team, and that they could be happy in the job, So that was very important as well, because they didn't know us from Adam, and it was a big change. So there was, beyond that, Ireland, and beyond that, Europe, beyond that, the world, and all of those constituencies you had to manage. But, it was brilliant because you were down in Haggardstown 1 minute, and then the next thing you could be leading a trade delegation to China. So all of that.
What were the highlights for you, or was there a particular highlight?
There are two really outstanding highlights for me. The first of them, undoubtedly, is Ireland hosting the World Summer Games, the Special Olympics. I thought that showcased Ireland at its absolutely heart-meltingly best. We were still in the throes of the Celtic Tiger, and people thought we had lost the run of ourselves, which, we probably did. But yet, when we were asked to find, an army of 60,000 volunteers, when we were asked to raise millions, we did. When every hole in the wall was asked to host people from all over the world, they did. When we were asked to make people welcome, we did. And then we had just the best time as athletes came from all over the world with their families, their coaches. And we were the first country outside of the United States to do that. We tiny country like us that put on a show that I don't think has ever been equalled. It was brilliant. So that, for me, when I look back at those years, I'm so proud of what we did as a people. And also it was North and South. That was also very good and very reassuring. Then I think the Queen's visit was also a credit to Ireland, to welcome her, given the history, and to give her the 4 best days of her life.
That was 2011.
That was 2011. That was shortly before I left
yeah.
office. So that was wonderful, because that was healing, and that was focused on the future. It was putting the past behind us, because God knows, when you look at the past as between Ireland and the United Kingdom doesn't come out of it well. You know, we were bullied, we were oppressed, we were treated badly, and then we had the whole northern uproar of the Troubles. We had all that. Then we had her relative murdered at Mullaghmore, and we had all the stuff that involved the British Army, going right back to the first Bloody Sunday in November of 1920. All that raggedy, messy history. And so I thought that she came clearly to try and heal that the best she could. I thought that was a good day's work. In between, you know, so those are kind of big gigs, if you like, big events. And then, of course, you had awful days like Omagh. We had the glory day of the Good Friday Agreement, you know, and the referenda in May of 1998, when we thought the world was going to be righted. And then in August, we had the nightmare. And again, life puts the little bits together. I had been working in Omagh before I became president. I've been up and down that road so many times that I think I straightened it. And I had been helping to set up, indeed setting up, the outreach campus from Queen's to Omagh.
Yes.
And so I knew everybody there, and all the people that were involved with me, local councillors, local government officials. And the day that happened, I immediately wanted to go to Omagh. And of course, the advice from our diplomats and indeed from our police was no, not to go. But I decided I would phone the chief executive of the council in Omagh, a good friend of mine. And he just said, Mary, you have to come, you must, we need you. And I went, I got out of the car, and the political head of the council was a very well-known unionist, Alan Rainey. And Alan came towards me, and he just hugged me, and I hugged him, and the two of us just fell into each other's arms in tears. And you see, that's how you build relationships. That's what you do. You don't stand back. You take, I mean, people thought that was a risky thing to do. It actually wasn't. I was so sure that it would go right. Others who are paid to be risk averse were terrified. And I felt it was so important to be there. And then we went up to Donegal, where one of the young boys up Buncrana, where one of the young boys had died in that. And I got a tap on my shoulder sitting at the front of the church, and it was David Trimble. And again, we just embraced each other. Those were very moving times for me. But then you had to understand that underneath all that, the true trauma was being felt by the families.
But you knew what they were feeling, because
I wonder, did I? Because that was, I hope I did, but I felt for them, because they were also overwhelmed by the size of the story. It was so big, so vast. There were cameras from all over the world there. It would have been easy to get lost, to not find yourself, to find your sadness completely overlooked and your grief overlooked. And so that's also a thing I've learned from these events, that it is important to go back to them again, and to look at the people who might feel they've been overlooked. It's easy for people like me to be in a photograph, but somehow it mightn't be that easy for the man who lost the wonderful wife and mother who was expecting twins. And, that you look at what they suffered. The suffering doesn't go away. I mean, they carry it for life. So I think the older I've got, and also the more I've reflected back on my own experiences, and realised that some stuff just doesn't leave you.
You've reminded me of watching television on September the 11th, and you were in the garden of the Oras, and you came out. It was the 6 o'clock news, and everybody was coming to terms with the Twin Towers and the atrocities. And I can still see you. I could probably say what you were wearing, and you were just doing a piece to camera. And I just said, my goodness, I just feel that this woman understands what people are going through. And that's obviously from your own experience
from life
as well.
Experience. Yeah. And I remember going out that day. I watched the second I watched on the television as the second plane hit, because somebody roared at me to come into the office to hear what was after happening. We turned on the television, and then the next thing, the second tower hit. And the poor Indian ambassador had just arrived to present credentials, and I had the awful job to go in and tell him what had happened. And then the camera crews came up looking for my response. And I remember going out and just saying, as I would very often in circumstances where you're under pressure, just saying, God, give me these words and make sure these words are right. And
they were very right.
And I was lucky that they were, that, we've had such a response to them. Even still, when I'd go to America, you'd meet people who say, I remember that day. And how proud they were that Irish America was represented in that way. So, yes, there were days when you just had to find somehow the right words, because that's the day when you are the president, yes, of a country, and you're speaking on behalf of the people of that country, and you're trying to get their heart and their soul and their hurt and their solidarity and their compassion into the right words.
14 years of service as President of Ireland is a huge honour, a huge responsibility, but comes with a lot of sacrifice as well, Mary. You know, your privacy, your family life. I remember your daughter Emma got married during your presidency.
She did.
And she got married in Rome.
She did.
Now, would that have happened had you not been president?
No, she probably would have got married in Rostrevor.
Yeah.
And we probably would have had not just the two families, but all our families and friends. But we decided against that. Well, actually, I say we, Emma herself and her then husband-to-be, Micheál, they came to us and said, look, we've decided we want to prepare for a marriage rather than a wedding, which I thought was a lovely thing to say, because I hadn't done that when I got married. And, we had the country and its mother. I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, well, you know half the country. And Micheál's father, who is Mick O'Connell, the former great Kerry footballer, he knows the other half. So we probably spend our whole time arguing over who's on guest lists and who's not. And she said, we don't want to do that. We said, fair enough. Why don't we plan for something small? I didn't want to have it in the Áras because I didn't want anybody ever to upcast to us that we had used the Áras, which of course is paid for by the public, for a family wedding, even though we would have paid for it, but we wouldn't have paid for the house, do you know what I mean? So we decided
the hire of the hall would have been free.
So we hit on, I said, what about Rome? Would you fancy going to Rome? And yes, and I thought maybe getting married up in the Lateran, the baptistry, where a lot of Irish people get married. And I talked to my dear friend, Father Liam Bergen, who was then head of the Irish College and who actually married Emma. And he said, would you fancy getting married in the Vatican? And I said, God, do you have to be a president for that? He said, not at all. You can actually do it online. Any Catholic, anybody can do that. So that's what happened. We had 13 people at the wedding. Talk about looking for trouble. So there was the two families, and then the priest made 13. We had a lovely wedding, very nicely. The Irish ambassador at the time said to me, look, would you like to come up to the house for just a bit of a reception? And I thanked him and said it was very kind of him. But for the same reason that we didn't have the wedding in the Áras, the answer was no, because again, I never wanted anybody to upcast to us that we used improperly, or properly for that matter even, funds that belonged to the state. I wanted Emma to know that we were very careful of her future. So what we did instead was, I said, look, tell you what we will do though. We'll take everybody out, including all the people who were minding us, our police detail and all that. We'll take everybody out, including the ambassador and his wife, the night before for a pizza. So we did that. And we just a random place down the street from the hotel we were staying in. It was absolutely great. I think he might have recommended it to us. And we had a lovely night before the wedding and a lovely day at the wedding.
Well, you mentioned there, Mary, that it was the important thing was that it was about Emma and Micheál and their marriage. You've also been a wonderful champion for everybody in your family, and I'm thinking now of Justin and the fact that Justin is gay. And yes. How did that kind of work with you and making sure that everything was fine for him?
Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Sponsored by the Meadowlands Hotel in Tralee.
Well, Well, I always knew in my own mind that in a famous expression of my grandmother's, you don't know what you're rearing, by which she meant that everybody has their own personality and their own, their own charisms, their own greatness, their own goodness, their own problems and issues. And she should have known. She had 11 children and she had 60 grandchildren. I don't know how many, but 140 great-grandchildren. And she was a very, very, very open woman, very accepting of all that God gave her and all that came in through her door, which was a lot of, ups and downs, good and bad. I had been involved with gay rights campaigning from about 75. Justin was born in 85. So I had no way of knowing what any of my kids could have been gay, could have been anything, could have been ended up trans or whatever. But I've always had the view that whatever your children are, you have to have their back. That's what you're on this earth to do. You bring them into the world, you have a 100% responsibility. In terms of raising them the best you can, looking after them the best you can, putting them first, not spoiling. I mean giving them good values, giving them love and nurturing them through the ups and downs of life. But I reckon that sometime I did intuit that I thought Justin might be gay. I always tell him that, it was whenever at age 7 that he asked Santa Claus for a Hoover, and I thought, oh, here we go. He had a girlfriend, he had the most gorgeous girlfriend. That he met at school. We loved her. We still do. She's still his best friend. He's 40 years old now. And Ellie is still his absolute best friend. He came to us to say, Mum, I think, you probably have worked it out by now, or you should, but I want to tell you is that I'm gay. And I said, well, son, whatever you are, we're happy. Because thank God in our house, he'd never heard a homophobic word. I'm always so glad of that, because a lot of kids, parents, think nothing of saying throwaway lines, not realising the kid is listening. And, from 4, 5, 6, they're picking it up. And that can be the inhibitor, the thing that stops them from saying, drives them into the dark spaces. Well, our house was the opposite. I was involved in the campaign for homosexual law reform. 2 of the guys who were involved in it had bought a house together. Now, this was a relatively new phenomenon at the time. And they were having a housewarming. We get to the door, knock the door, and we're probably a few minutes late, and the door opens and it's Father Brian Darcy in his robes for saying Mass. And Brian said, you took your time. He said the Mass had nearly started. There was something beautiful about it. And Martin sat beside one of the guy's grannies, who said to him, I've known him since he was born, and I don't understand this, but I know he's a good person. When Justin came out gay, Martin became the champion. We have to have his back. We have to make sure he knows we love him. He has to know that our door's open. There isn't a closed part of our mind. And dare anybody say a word against him that have Martin to deal with. So yeah, that all worked out fine. And there he is. He's 40 years old now, married to the most gorgeous human being that ever God put on the planet, a Wexford man, Finan. We've got 2 beautiful sons-in-law. We've got Michal, who's married to Emma, and we have Finan married to Justin, and they are great for each other. And I think they were on their either 3rd or 4th date before Finan figured out that he was my son. I was in Rome at the time studying for either my licentiate or doctorate in canon law, whichever. And he said to Finan that he was going to Rome the following weekend, that his mammy was there, living there at the moment. And Finan said, oh, he said, gosh, that's funny. He said, Mary McAleese is there. And Justin said, yeah, I actually do know that. And Finan said, yeah, it's like, would she be any relation of yours? And Justin said, could you ever just take 2 and 2
join them together?
At which point Finan nearly died, thinking 4th date he figured it out.
Mary, when you think about the situation and the love between Justin and Finan and the lovely life they have together as a married couple, and the fact that is such a difficulty for the Catholic Church, and you are a devout Catholic, how do you reconcile your continuance and the fact that you continue to I suppose fight the good fight?
I have to. The Church is absolutely wrong in relation to its teaching on homosexuality. It doesn't understand human sexuality well. It has never really investigated it fully. It adopts an attitude which is based on almost a hysterical fear, has no biblical or theological logic to it, but more importantly, it has no Christian or human logic to it. It's hurtful. It hurts people. It drives people into dark spaces. We know that in certain continents, it even results in them being subject, not just to the criminal laws, as it was the case in Ireland, but to death penalties. This is ludicrous. This is God's creation. These are good people who find themselves, didn't decide to be gay. I literally hate what my church says. The language it uses, that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered. I think church teaching is intrinsically disordered. That homosexual acts are evil. I think that teaching is evil. It comes out of an evil place, a complete misunderstanding, and sometimes a deliberate misunderstanding of the human condition. There is no excuse for it today when we know so much more, when the world of psychology, which used to describe it as a disease, no longer does, understands that it is normal, natural part of the human condition, that it's not as binary as we think it is. So I can't say I was born into the Catholic Church, but I was born into a family that was Catholic. They baptised me, and having baptised me at 2 weeks old, that made me a Catholic, believe it or not. I'm lucky that I have a voice and that I have... All over the years, I've always been interested, you see. From I was at school, I was always interested in religion. I was good in religion class. You know, it was one of the few subjects I would come first in. And
after your 14 years in the Orus, you actually went to Rome and took a PhD in canon law.
And before I even did that, in preparation for leaving the Orus, I was, as you said, 14 years. And coming out of that, you know, I was still relatively young. I was in 60-ish. And so what was I going to do? I already had a master's degree, you see, in canon law. And I did that while I was in the Orus. You know, that was my kind of hobby. Reading, 2 o'clock in the morning, reading books later.
My goodness.
You know, well, luckily enough, I mean, I could do that and knit at the same time. I never had a 5-year plan in my life until then. But I knew that that was what I wanted to do. I felt driven to do that. Also because I knew that the church that we were entering was dealing with these difficult issues, issues of women in the church, the exclusion of women from decision-making, not just priesthood, but from all decision-making, the second-class nature of women in the church, the failure of the church to address where do the human rights that we all have to freedom of conscience, opinion, belief and expression and freedom to change religion, why has canon law never absorbed them into canon law and has resisted them? So I knew that was the space I wanted to be in, but I had to have the credentials. I had to have.
And what was it like being there in Rome in a male-dominated...
Oh, but that part not so wonderful. But Rome itself,
of course,
utterly wonderful. I mean, I loved the place and I was very privileged. I did a licentiate in canon law. That's kind of the professional qualification in canon law. Because I already had the master's now, so now I did the licentiate. In my class, they were all priests, young priests.
And what was that like?
Interesting. They were kind in the sense that shortly after I arrived, you see, they all would have known each other long before I arrived, because bear in mind, they'll have done 5 years prior to this. They were all young priests, mostly young American priests who honestly worried me. Not all of them. Some of them were terribly nice. There was a couple of Spaniards, Italian, and a lovely young Irishman. But the first night we went out, I was distraught at the level of homophobic joke making. Now, I began to wonder, was it because they knew my background in gay rights? Were they deliberately trying to be provocative? But they did worry me, I thought. And I said to them, lads, really, stop with this stuff now. Because if I sit here and I said, I'm meeting you for the first time and you're very good to take me out to get to know me. But honestly, if I sit here and say nothing, you will think I agree with you. Whereas if I say that I don't agree with you and explain why, I'd hope that you wouldn't use this language again because it's hurtful. I said, but more importantly, you've been together now for, 5 years? And I know that in this company, there are people who are gay and who are hurting because their friends are using this language, but they can't possibly divulge that. So over the course of the time, I got to know those who were gay among them. They came to me. So there were some of them who had been, if you like, coached what to say And one of the ways in which they felt able to hide their homosexuality was to take on a veneer of homophobia. And that's heartbreaking.
And Mary, when you think then of the issues that you have described with regard to homophobia and also with regard to the position of women in the church, which you've been a champion of as well, like, are you hopeful for the future? Like, will they ever learn?
That's a good way of putting it. Will they ever learn? Because the they in question it's the bishops along with the Pope. If they learn, they will learn from the people, because the 1.4 billion lay people live lives that are different. They live with the messiness of life. They live with kids. They live with broken relationships. They live with broken marriages. They live with people who got pregnant when they shouldn't have. They live with kids who are gay, with kids who are trans. They live with people who are controlling and who are religious to the point of ramming it down your throat. They live with people who are saintly, who would never dream of ramming anything down. So they live with the messiness of life. And they are the people who put together, for me, the kind of church we want for the future.
Apart from talking about the church, within the secular world, there are also difficulties. And I'm thinking of your son, Justin, who's living in the United States now.
Yes.
Is that something that worries you?
Oh, yes, and I'm very glad he's coming home.
Oh, good.
I'm very glad that he and Fanon are coming home to live in Ireland.
Is that decision
well, that decision was made for them the day they left, because they went because Fanon had been given he's a surgeon, and he'd been given a phenomenal opportunity to do a fellowship in one of the world's two top cancer or oncology hospitals. So he couldn't say no to that. And so they decided to make an adventure of it. And they went to live in the United States, went to live in Manhattan in New York. And they've had a wonderful time. Justin is a chartered accountant, has been for many years, worked with Mick O'Leary and Ryanair for many years, would have a huge regard and respect, learnt an awful lot from Michael O'Leary, and then has had a stellar career as a chartered accountant, expert in corporate governance and all that. And then out of the wide blue yonder, he said to me during the very beginning of COVID, when he had just been offered a sort of mega job, he said, "Mum, I'm not going to take that job. I want to become a lawyer." And I said, "Really? Why?" He said, "I've really always wanted to." He said, "You weren't very encouraging, unfortunately." And so he said, "But now I'm in a position to go back and study, and I want to." So he did. And of course, from day one, loved it. It was his thing. But I do believe that the years behind were a preparation for it.
And has his life and Fionnual's life changed in any way since Trump became president?
Silence everywhere, fear everywhere. His colleagues, they're all terrified that the troopers will come in one of these days and remove them from their desks, because Trump has named quite a number of those judges and the special prosecutors and the lawyers and the attorneys. He has listed their names and said he's coming after them. Why? Because they came after him. And he's full of vengeance, unfortunately, it seems. And they are terrified. These are people with kids in school. They're paying school fees. They've got mortgages. They have car loans. They thought they also, as Justin said, the scary thing is many of them still have invested so heavily in their education. They have massive loans. But so anyway, I'm glad he's coming home.
I was about to say you must be really glad that he and Fionn are coming home.
I'm delighted he's coming home. Now, he's loved it, and they've been so privileged. They've had a ball.
On the subject of home, having left Áras Nuachtaráin and spent some time in Rome, you and Martin relocated to your father's home place.
Did, yes.
And is that very special to you?
Reverse migration, because my father's one of five, born in a very tiny rural part of North County Roscommon, between Croghan and Carrick and Shannon. Courtubber, really, I suppose, Croghan. And his people would be from there, from nearer Ballinameen, actually, probably. But anyway, he, like all of his brothers and sisters, they all emigrated. Mm-hmm. And we, of course, spent a lot of time with our grandparents there. And there's a long road, and dotted along the road are the little cottages, typical Irish cottages, little two-room cottages where my father was reared. And we would tip in and out of all those. When we would go down as kids from Belfast, my father was very faithful to his parents, and he had a car. He was lucky in the early days. My dad had a car, and he would take us to his parents. You were always struck by the loneliness because every house had just 2 old people really in it, but there were big families. There might be one of 11 brothers and sisters. So I was very aware of the loneliness of those people whose kids were all working in building sites, or my father was a barman in Belfast, and all belonging to him went to London and America. But I love that part of the world. The nearest town to us is Carrick and Shannon. Now, my father's on the Roscommon side, so strictly speaking, I suppose Boyle would have been the place that we would have gone to get the roll of wallpaper. But you see, Carrick was on the river, and Boyle's on the Boyle River, but yeah, Carrick's on the Shannon, and it's a beautiful town. And I've always I think Carrick and Shannon is one of the most special places in Ireland. Probably it is. It's the nicest town on the Shannon. I'm just going to say it. It's the nicest town on the Shannon, and the people are gorgeous. Mm-hmm. They're so gracious and so welcoming and such fun. You go into a cafe and everybody's full of old chat. They're just delightful, and there's so much to do around it. And I've watched Carrick just blossom. So when I didn't know that I would be 14 years in the Irish. I mean, I knew I'd be 7 if God spared me, because I was elected for 7 years, but I had no expectation that people would re-elect me. Back in around 2002, 2003 coming, I knew in 2004, I thought I'd be leaving office in 2004. We started to look at where would we position ourselves. We still had our home in Northern Ireland, but I couldn't go back there. Not because I don't love the village of Rostrevor. I think it's also the most beautiful village in Ireland, but to go back there would have meant probably being forever protected by police and what have you. So, and I didn't want that. The day I left the Aris, I just put on my hoodie and my shoes and resumed normal life. No state car, none of that stuff. So, and I didn't want any fuss and bother going back to, even though it hurt me desperately to have to sell our home in Rostrevor, but we did. What would we do? Where would we go? And with the money that we got for the sale of our house, we decided we would build in Roscommon. And God, first of all, my father thought we were criminally insane, because we bought a small farm where there had been 3 old cottages. They were all in ruins, obviously, by the time we moved in there. It hadn't been inhabited since the 1930s. Once upon a time, 31 people lived in that tiny plot of land, a lot of them relatives of my father. At that time, the Shannon was tidal, and sometimes it could have been 2 feet high until Ardna Crusher. And my father remembered carrying coffins from one side to the other because it was an old graveyard. He remembered as a young fella carrying coffins across, because he was barefoot until he came to Belfast, got his first pair of shoes at 14. So we thought about it, and there was a piece of land there. You see, all the people there had been decanted up to the hill where my father also was decanted to. And he came from a forested area beyond the hill up onto this metalled road where there was a school. What a big change in their lives. And then from the other side of the Shannon, these people who lived in the small plot of land that we now live on, their mode of transport was small boats going up and down the Shannon, because the road was only a tiny track which constantly was flooded. They were moved up to my father's road, and we were in and out of their houses. And one in particular, a great old pal, she constantly told us about life. We could see the plot of land that we now live in, we could see from my grandfather's home, from the field. We could look down and see it. And she would tell us stories about living on, because it's on the Shannon. I mean, the Shannon flows through the front garden. Some days we have 30 acres, and depending on the mood of the Shannon, we might have 10 or 20, depends on the mood. She was always talking about it. And I could look across, I could see the cattle moving. I could see there was no human beings living there. And anyway, the land come for sale. And we bought it. In the meantime, we had discovered that Martin, who thought he had no links whatever to Carrick and Shannon, but he loved the place. Like me, he loved it. We went to Mass one St. Patrick's Day in Carrick, in the beautiful church in Carrick. There was a lovely man gave the homily Oscuelga in Irish, you see. There's an air of familiarity about him. I couldn't put my finger on, didn't know the man now. But coming out, I met my cousin Nuala. And I said, God, Nuala, that was a lovely homily. That man has beautiful Irish. Oh, she said, that man, he's a former senator, she said. He's a head of the local vocational school. Oh, I said, and what's his name? Oh, she said, Farrell McElgunn. I said, seriously? Sure, that's Martin's mommy's name, McElgunn. Didn't it turn out he was a cousin of Martin's mother?
Oh, there you go.
And the spitting image of her. That's why.
So you both have roots there.
That's why he was so familiar. Mm-hmm. It was almost, for Martin, it was almost like I knew I was going to love this place. Now, he literally adores every blade of grass. No wonder he has tended every blade of grass. I mean, every 5 minutes he's out doing the garden. He loves the place. So it's been a very happy home for us. We were privileged that we were able to build our own. It's not a big gin palace now. It's a modest bungalow, but we love it. And
in that kind of setting, do you have time then for like pastimes? I know you've mentioned knitting and you got that from your mother, but are there other
and sewing? So, for example, when we moved in, I decided that all the curtains, all the bedspreads, I would make them. So I made them all myself. And they're still there, 20 odd years later. So I think I chose good material. And they're very simple, they're very plain, but I love them. And I thought that took a bit of time. And reading, of course, and I still love to read. And in particular, I like to read stuff in relation to the church. And then, of course, we moved into the house in 2003. But I was still in the Aris, so it became home, the weekend place, the holiday home. It was never a holiday home, it was always our home, but the place we went to from the Aris on holidays. And we just adored the place. We're right on the Shannon. So there's always life on it, and we have the most magnificent vista, but also wonderful neighbours. We don't spend enough time there, unfortunately, because we're on the road the whole time. There's always something to be done in Dublin.
It's a lovely place to come home to.
But it is, and it's a calming place. And it is home. There's nothing nicer than sitting, looking out at the Shannon, having a cup of tea in the morning or a cup of hot water in my case, and just looking out and counting how many swans have come upriver. So we're lucky. We live deep in the heart of nature now. At the very beginning, one of our neighbours kept cattle on the land. They're gone now. Then somebody else kept sheep on the land. We just said to them, if you want it, go ahead. But then I become more conscious that we're on a river and we have an obligation to keep it beautiful and to keep it pristine. So we just grow hay on it now, and the neighbour takes a cut of hay off it every year and to feed his cattle. They're so good to us and so kind to us. It's nice to be able to do something back for them.
Well, I can see you enjoying the tranquility of home there and knitting and sewing and reading, as you say. But I also know from being away with you, Mary, that you like to shop.
I love to shop, Mary. Oh, Mary. And you know what? Emma said to me the other day that she asked Mossy, my 9-year-old grandson, what he'd like to do, and he wanted to go to the shopping centre. And I thought, he's my grandson.
I'll bring him.
He is my grandson. Absolutely. And I'm always looking for a bargain. You're the same. You love a bargain.
Oh, no, I love bargains.
Love shopping.
Yeah, we do like
and
bargains.
When we go away on holiday, sure, we haunt the shops. And no, we're not talking about exclusive play. We don't do the exclusives. We do the small and the bargain. The bargain rail. We fight over it. And I do. Yeah, I still love to shop. You see, when I was living in Belfast, we lived at the top of the Shankill Road. And the Shankill Road's a great shopping road. It was then. I think it's changed a lot now. But in those days, out the front door, walk down the Shankill, and you could buy old army blankets, for example. And my granny could turn them into the nicest coat you ever saw. She had an old Singer sewing machine. She made that thing sing. I mean, it was well named. She could knit to the band playing, and she would unravel, old cardigans and old jumpers that had, and she'd salvage the best part, and they would be recycled. Boy, that woman could recycle for Ireland. And so that was the culture I grew up in, down the Shankill Road into the place called Loans. And I loved the big bales of fabrics. And so, see, there was no Dunnes Stores or pennies then. So everything you wore, somebody had to make it. My parents couldn't have afforded to go to the fancy shops. My mother was a great sewer and a great seamstress, as was her mother and my great-grandmother, Granny Rogan. She was a tailoress. Boy, she was good. My granny's hands were never idle. She was either baking or sewing or knitting. And I got that from her. If I'm sitting watching television, which I don't do a lot of, I'd have to be knitting. If I'm in the car and Martin's driving, I'd have to be knitting. It was the same when I was the president. Martin would say to me, you're going to be the first president in history killed by knitting needles. Because sometimes, you know, when you're flying in these cars, sometimes you take a bend, you know, and the next thing the needles would go flying. And he said, one of the two of us is going to be stabbed to death by knitting needles. So I'd still be, you know, I don't like idle hands.
In keeping, Mary, with the theme of our podcast, the question we ask everybody, is there anything that you would change for yourself or just generally, if you had that power?
I was born in Belfast during very, very sectarian times. And if I could change one thing, it would be to strip Belfast of sectarianism and to turn it into the pleasant, happy, neighbourly place it could be. I grew up in a Protestant neighbourhood, wonderful neighbours for the most part. Friends who are friends to this very day, who disavowed all the sectarianism around us, but it was there and it was hurtful, hateful and destructive. And it messed up lives, as we know, dreadfully. So if I could change one thing, because I do love Belfast, you know, and I love to see it flourishing now. And I would love to have grown up in a Belfast that had transcended all that. I'd love to live in a future Belfast where that has all been transcended, where life is normal, natural, and in particular, that damned wall that runs up past where we lived, you know, in some places 50 feet high, some places 8 or 10 feet high, designed to keep Protestants and Catholics apart. I'd love to see that gone.
When you reflect now on your life, what are the thoughts that come to you?
Too short. Too short. Where did it go, Mary? I don't know what time means. When I was younger, you always seem to be looking forward, stretching out into time. Well, I've lived all that time now. And that's all behind me. And I thought, where did it go? I mean, I'm in my 70s now, and I still feel like I'm 18. I wish I had the energy of an 18-year-old, mind you. But I wonder. So I don't know what time means. My mother, thanks be to God, and some of her sisters live very long lives. My mum's in her 90s, still going strong. And I look at my father dead and gone, my darling sister dead and gone, of the 9 of us, and I look and say, it was just too quick. If I'd known how quick it was going to be, I might have savoured it more. So I suppose what that does for me now is makes me, since I don't know what's ahead of us, I mean, none of us do, I want to savour more of it. I'm so lucky that Martin and I still have each other, because some of my friends have lost their life's companions, and I've seen how that has devastated them. Even my darling, my mum's youngest sister, who was one of my great friends, and she was only 7 years older than me. My mum's one of 11. She's the middle one. And my Auntie Anne, we were great mates. She had 6 kids. And her husband died in his 50s. And they were together from they were 15. They were so united. What a great couple. He was one of the founders of Come in the Mud Skull. Great, great guy, Pat. Wonderful. And they had such a loving house to go into. Just full of fun and out crack and good humour, always good humour. And I look at her, she's dead and gone now. And I just say, I wish I'd spent more time with her. Now, she came and stayed with me in Rome when she was quite ill. And one of the joys of that visit, she brought 2 of her girls with her. And I remember taking her to a restaurant that I loved. And I still remember the gorgeous, handsome young waiters, member of the family. And I've known him for a long time, and he's always very friendly. And he said to me, who is this you brought with you? And I said, this is my aunt and her 2 daughters. And he said to me, that has to be a lie. That woman couldn't possibly be your aunt. She's too young. And then he said to her, you have the most beautiful eyes. Now, she was only a few months away from death at this stage. And she was, stage 4 cancer. And she said to me afterwards, nobody ever told me that I had beautiful eyes. And I said, I should have told you because you have beautiful eyes. Anyway, she was so thrilled. And what it brought to me was, she used to send me very nice little poems she'd written about her husband, usually in the middle of the night when she was feeling desperately lonely. Now, she has 6 children who are wonderful to her, as she was to them. Very close family, shocking good to each other. But with your husband gone, your life's partner gone, it's just not the same. The big gap is there. So I look at my life now and I want to enjoy every minute I have with Martin. Every single minute.
Thank you, as always, to our producer, Enda Grace, here at Dundara Television and Media in County Kildare. We're also very grateful to our researcher, Anne-Marie Staunton, and to our wonderful sponsor, the Meadowlands Hotel in Tralee, for their continued support. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to rate Changing Times wherever you get your podcasts. So, from all of us here in Allenwood, County Kildare, go dtí an chéad uair slán agaibh.
Changing Times, the Allenwood Conversations.
Sponsored by the Meadowlands Hotel in Tralee.